What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Granger Smith Podcast. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for this platform. I'm grateful for my right to sit here in front of you and tell you my opinion and have this platform that is very unique to be able to tell you stories of where I came from and stories of where I want to go and stories from some of my buddies. This is a way for me to get closer to you as a listener and as a viewer, so that you could see a side of me that maybe you don't see just on the stage singing country music. Maybe you can get to know me a little bit better, and that's the reason for this podcast. That's the reason I've done all these episodes in the past, which started on my bus, Wildflower, on tour in a parking lot of some venue. We don't do that anymore. We don't tour anymore yet. We will be touring very soon, and it seems like I've been saying this over and over, like beating a dead horse, but it's not a matter of if, it's when things will get back to normal. I reject the idea of the new normal, the new way of life, the new way that we're going to live. That's not right. Right now, we're living in a current reality. The state of the world is very different right now, but we will return back to normal, back to the old normal. And if you don't, and if anyone tells you that we won't, if anyone is telling you that we're about to enter a new normal, then you have to question their motives. You have to wonder why they want you to think that way. Because to me, this is a virus that eventually will go away. We will conquer it like all humans do. And whether we find a vaccine, whether we find herd immunity, whatever that might be, and no matter how long that takes, it will go away, and then we'll get back to normal. That's my little spiel for the time being. And I'm excited. I don't want to do a long intro today because I have a really cool guest. And we got into some really good conversations. This episode is brought to you by Yee Apparel, the apparel company that me and my brothers have right here in Central Texas, right here at the Yee Farm. Thank you for all the support. If you have Yee Apparel, if you sport Yee Apparel, we are honored. And it is a big responsibility for me to continue to make a quality product and to give you my best opinions about the world so that you could be proud to represent Yee. And you could be proud to be a member of Yee Nation, part of an elite club that I'm very proud of. I think it's something that I never dreamed we could have something like this, something that's much bigger than music, much bigger than any individual. And that's what Yee is to me. Today's guest, Mike Ritland, an amazing human being. He's a vet, but he has gone above and beyond. He served 12 years as United States Navy SEALs, and he was part of an elite canine unit. He has a special relationship with dogs, and so you've all seen service dogs, and they're always amazing. It's always amazing to see a service dog at work. Well, you can imagine if you've seen any kind of service dog, you can imagine a United States Navy SEAL service dog would be an elite version of any other service dog you've ever seen. And that's exactly what Mike has handled. And it's what he currently does in his post-combat work. And I want you to hear all about that. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mike Ritland, welcome to the Granger Smith Podcast. Yee.
Dead cans and diesel, mud tires and smoke. Long line of 4x4s bumping down an old back road. Raise your cold ones high, it's a redneck invasion. Yeah, you're rocking with that Yee Nation.
I think I'll start with saying that through my travels, there's a question that comes up a lot. People say, besides Texas, is there a place that you've traveled to that you would actually want to live? So you need to think about like Colorado and those are a lot of beautiful places. But what I usually tell them surprises them, and I'll say Iowa.
Really?
Because I think about those rolling green hills of corn and those red barns and silos. And I've told my wife, I was like, you don't understand. Iowa is unbelievable. Yeah. So beautiful in its own way. It's the most American state scenery I can imagine. And that's where you're from.
It is, and one of the reasons why I feel so at home in Texas, especially in a place like this and where my kennel facility is it's very similar to that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're driving down the road out in front of your place, or the outskirts of the town I grew up in, you wouldn't know which one is which. So,
yeah.
There's a lot of commonality, I think, between Texas and Iowa in terms of not just terrain, but from a demographic standpoint, the morals and values of people and the way people treat each other, the way people take care of their things, and there's kind of a feeling of being home in both places that exist. But it's neat that with the amount of traveling that you've done, that you recognize that. It's pretty awesome.
Awesome, man. I'm gonna adjust this for you. Last guest I had in here was Robert Oberst. He's 6'8". So
like 400 pounds. He didn't break the bench.
So, Mike, thank you. You drove up from Dallas, 3-hour trip to the Yee farm. First of all, thank you for driving up here. Thank you for your service. You have one hell of a resume. I was thinking, is there such thing as a former Navy SEAL, or once Navy SEAL, always Navy SEAL?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I appreciate the sentiment. My pleasure. Appreciate you bringing me down here.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I think most people don't use the term ex-Navy SEAL, but some people do. Most people say former.
Okay.
I don't really look at it as a once a Navy SEAL, always a Navy SEAL. I mean, to me, military-wide, if you're not on active duty, you're a former action guy, as it were. Right?
Sure.
So, to me, that's fine. I don't have a preference or get my panties in a bunch if somebody says X or whatever.
Gotcha. So former Navy SEAL. I start with that because that is. That's an elite title, no matter how you look at it. Yeah. You're also multi-time best-selling author. How's it feel to hear that now? That's probably crazy, right?
It's weird. If you'd have told me 10 years ago that I'd have written a book, let alone it made the New York Times, and then written 2 more that did the same thing, there's no way I'd have believed you. It's a weird title for sure. It's not something that comes up real often because I'm not an author in the traditional sense. Like, that's not what I do for a living, So because I don't hear it or talk about it very often, when people do bring it up, it still kind of strikes me as a little odd.
Sure.
And feels a little weird. But
sure.
But it's a hell of an honor. It's a neat group to be a part of, and I feel very fortunate, really. I mean, I kind of stumbled into the ability to do that, and it was just kind of the right place, the right time. The Bin Laden raid had happened not long before my first book came out, and when everybody found out that there was a dog on board, they kind of lost their minds and were like, wait, there was a dog there? Like, what was the dog there? Navy SEALs use dogs, and so. I had just come back from being a trainer on the West Coast for the SEAL Team K9 program out there, and it was just kind of lined up. I was at the right place at the right time. So there's certainly, a number of guys that have, far more impressive resumes as it relates to everything that probably have way more business writing a book about that than I do. But again, I kind of fell into the right spot.
So you led me into the next part of your intro, is your unique experience in a canine unit, an elite canine unit. And that I've kind of taken a deep dive in you these past few days preparing for this podcast. And you know a lot about dogs. You have a special relationship with dogs. There's a lot of people that say they're a dog guy.
Yeah.
But you have dogs that have saved your life, that you look at as more than a canine. It just is highly touted as a soldier, a fellow man to you.
Sure. I go through a lot of peanut butter, we'll put it that way.
Yeah.
For me, it's, I grew up a dog guy. Being in Iowa, if you've spent any time other than driving through there, most people know bird dogs and duck hunting is huge there. And so, just kind of having a healthy appreciation for labs and just bird dogs and hunting dogs, generally speaking, growing up, that kind of, manifested into an interest, early on in the early 2000s, where I was actually on a combat deployment to Iraq where there was a Marine dog just in the vicinity that we were in. It wasn't even a dog that saved my life or any of my teammates' lives. But we had been in the same scenario that this Marine outfit had been in, countless times and never had a dog with us. And this dog indicated on an explosive cache or booby trap, rather. And for me, that was kind of the light switch, or when my brain kind of clicked on of having an enormous interest and passion for working dogs. Up until that point, I'd done a fair bit of breeding and hunting with dogs in a host of different capacities, and had a pretty significant amount of dog knowledge from an animal husbandry standpoint, but not so much on the training side.
Sure.
And so. That kind of was the catalyst to dive rather really deep into the training component, and that was in early '03 at the start of the war, and then so from then up until as I sit here now, it's just been something that I've kind of lived and have never really looked back. But
I was kind of thinking you might bring a dog today.
If it was the winter time, I for sure would have.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably maybe a bite suit too. We'd get you in a bite suit and do some of that. I'm sure your fans would love that.
So you have some major injuries from bites?
I do. I guess I shouldn't say major. I mean, I've had my wrist broken, and I've had God knows how many times where I've been bit and filleted open, but. In terms of life-altering injuries, nothing.
Sure.
I will say that from doing bite work a lot, being in the suit and where they're biting your elbows and forearms and the inside of your bicep and the nerves and tendons that are in there that get bit over and over and over time, for sure. Like my hands are numb most of the time. They don't work that well in the morning for a while. It's absolutely taken its toll physically on me. There's no two ways about it. It's just that amount of bite pressure on any appendage over and over. I mean, it's like a boxer or a football player or a catcher squatting, banging his knees up. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It just runs you over after a while. So, but the thing with getting bit is an interesting thing because it's not really a natural component to life, right? Is that most people are actually pretty physically capable of defeating a dog, but have no idea how to do it. Their mentality is such that when it's happening, they panic. It's very similar to people that can't swim very well and they're in the water. That panic mentality is usually what takes place with human beings when a dog is trying to attack them. And so you're not thinking straight, you're emotional, you're panicky, there's adrenaline, and you do a lot of the wrong things. And so getting to a point where you're comfortable being bit, plays a huge role in being a good dog trainer from the decoy side. But when you are in that frame of mind, staying calm and thinking your way through everything and getting to the point where you're minimizing damage and neutralizing the dog, and that's what you're thinking about, not how bad it hurts or holy shit, there's a dog biting me or whatever. So obviously there's a huge difference between training and having a padded suit on where they can't hurt you nearly as much versus not having that equipment on and being bit.
And your bites were not with a suit?
Yeah, I mean, the ones, there's been a couple with equipment on that the dog bit hard enough to where it went through the equipment and still opened me up. That's pretty rare. Most dogs don't bite that hard, but the equipment is designed to keep you from being injured. You still feel it. You still get marked and bruised up, and your skin gets pinched and broken blood vessels and things like that. But no, that like where my wrist was broken and a number of other times where I've been completely opened up has been working with a dog, and it's always my fault.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's me not reading something right or putting trying too much too fast with a dog I'm not close enough with relationship wise. It's usually a combination of a few of those things that leads to the dog deciding, I'm gonna take a shot at the title, and then you end up getting bit. But.
And where do you neutralize a dog? I'm sure that's a huge conversation,
Yeah.
but what body part do you go after to neutralize a dog?
It's actually a great question. It's one that not too long ago Tim Kennedy had a run-in with a neighborhood dog, and I don't know if it was his child or a neighborhood kid or whatever, but there was this huge kind of going back and forth on what he should have done or didn't do or whatever, and I offered my advice, again, from somebody who has been in that situation more times than most people. And it's really not too dissimilar from a human being, right? Is that if you look at, say, the concepts of jiu-jitsu, you know, what's the primary two things that are your goal? It's body control and take their air away. You know, just like a human being, a dog that gets their air cut from them can't fight you,
right?
Can't hurt you. The only, the main difference between dogs and humans that way is that the dog's mouth is their primary and really only weapon, and it's far more devastating than most human beings anything, right? So, my recommendation for anybody is if they have a collar, you're in business. If they don't, it's harder. You can still maintain the same thing, but if they have a collar, don't pick a child up, because no different than if a human being was trying to attack you, you wouldn't pick the kid up, and now you're hamstrung. You can't defend yourself or the child as well. So, get the kid behind you, get in front of him, close the distance between the child and the dog, and now you're grabbing the dog. You want to get body control on the dog, grab the collar and choke him unconscious. When people get bit and they start smacking the dog or gouging eyes or grabbing their ears or trying to pick them up by their nuts or whatever, for a tough dog that's dedicated, those things are only going to make him angrier and probably more dedicated to hurt you or whoever he's trying to attack. So if the dog doesn't have a collar on, same thing is that I want to get body control, and by body control, I put, grab the dog. If he doesn't have a collar, grab his skin with both hands, pull him into you and straddle his back hips. And then at that point, pick him up by his tail. If he has a dock tail, pick him up by his back legs right at his stifles and lift his back end up off the ground. Again, if he doesn't have a collar. If he has the collar, choke him out. If he doesn't get control of his back end, lift it up off the ground. Is that way, at a minimum, he can't get back to you.
Sure.
The hard part with that is if the dog is dedicated and has a hard mouth and is trying to hurt you and accomplishes that, is that, again, most people, they get bit, they panic and things of that nature. So it's a lot easier said than done. You've got to keep a cool head, and if you do get bit, don't let that deter you. Stay dedicated to that process, and you're only going to be able to maximize your percentage chance for taking as little damage as possible. That should always be the goal.
Yeah. That
sequence isn't a guarantee that you're not going to get bit or injured. That's your best bet to stay out of the dog's mouth as much as possible, because what I can tell you from experience, whether it's a nasty hunting dog that, there's farm dogs around here, I'm sure, that are man-eaters that would give people a run for the money, that could probably take people's lives. When you have a dog that's in that, whether it's incited by prey drive or it's just a naturally, truly forwardly aggressive animal, that dog is pretty hard to deal with, and if you don't have the ability to do that, they're going to get the best of you. So it is important to keep a cool head and realize that, the gimmicky tricks of, well, I'll shove my forearm into his mouth harder, or I'll stick my hand down his throat. It's kind of akin to saying, I'm going to grab that chainsaw and stop it from moving.
Right.
Right. It really is. They bite hard enough to break bone. God. And I'll show you some pictures of some live bites after this that we won't post for you guys, unfortunately. But it's legitimate, like, life-altering damage when you have a dedicated dog that's hell bent on hurting you and gets a hold of you. It's pretty rough to deal with.
I thought I had it bad with a mean rooster at home.
Well, the cock will get you.
So that's what I was going to ask, if you've ever seen a bad guy successfully neutralize a dog.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It does happen.
Without a gun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I would say that it's rare. It's excruciatingly rare, but it does happen. The dogs are not invincible. Usually when it happens is, it's somebody who is physically very capable. And is usually on something. They don't feel any pain. Their state of mind or mentality is completely whacked out. For most people that aren't used to being bit, and can't keep that level head, when they do, that's all they think about. And it's mind-boggling. Sometimes you'll see people that, a guy that's the size of your last guest, or some semblance of that size, that will hand 6 cops their ass, right? In a fist fight, they can't get control of this guy. And then they pop out a little 60-pound female Malinois, and the guy's like, nope, and he just lays down and says, I'm not messing with the dog. So they are a very different, less than lethal mechanism for maintaining, order and apprehension in criminal scenarios. But But just like with human beings, or even our best special operations soldiers, there are times where they don't win. It's rare. Overwhelmingly they're far more successful. But there are times where, whether it's a collar or somebody just has the ability, their hands and grip strength is enough to where they grab them by the throat, or can injure the dog enough to to neutralize that. What I will say is that whether it's a home invasion scenario, a law enforcement, a military, whatever, is that even in the instances where the dog is defeated, one, it never happens fast. And even if the subject is utilizing a firearm, what it's doing is it's still giving you an ability to now neutralize that person as well.
He's busy.
So yeah, he there's a lot of things he's not paying attention to. All of his focus is on the dog. So even in overseas scenarios where the guy's armed and dumps a mag into the dog and shoots and kills him, which again doesn't happen often, but in those instances, it's still, now you've got 4, 6, 8, 10 guys who now have the jump on this guy, and he's not going to last much longer than that.
Sure,
So,
makes sense. Have you ever heard of them say, I don't think it'd be as much domestic-wise, but say a terrorist, an Islamic terrorist, have you seen them train for dogs?
Not really.
Because I do know they like to target them, right?
For sure they do. I mean, no different than, say in World War II, where they had to redo helmets and different rank and insignia, markers and
Right.
devices on their stuff to
Right.
not say, hey, that's a captain, let's take him out or whatever. Similarly, yeah, they many times are targeted, more so than even the human counterparts, because they know what they bring to the table. In terms of training, no, I've never seen really any effective countermeasures, and honestly, there really isn't, other than what they already do. I mean, in terms of just fighting them the way that they fight us and whatever, that's about as good as you're going to do. There's not really some unique trick or tip that that's going to give people the advantage over dogs. I mean, that's why they're really so useful, frankly, is that, if you look at the scope of mankind combating one another, in an age where, from the Stone Age all the way up until present day, we've got, billions of dollars of equipment and, laser guided munitions and night vision and thermal and, helicopters that do amazing things and all that kind of stuff. The one thing that's still used in combat other than human beings are dogs, from day one up until present day. I mean, for our own nation's most elite special operations forces to use dogs out in front of them tells you a lot about the efficacy of them and how well they work, because soft units don't use things that don't work. And so the fact that they use dogs as much as they do and have as much success with them as they do, I think speaks volumes to their efficacy for sure. But
That is so cool, man. Just the fact that, like you said, it goes through history of mankind of using canines in warfare for all different reasons, whether it's reconnaissance or sniffing out bombs or
even World War II was probably the most wide array of practical applications of them. I mean, they used them as messengers, as medic carriers. They'd moving equipment around. Guard dogs, sentry dogs, detector dogs. I mean, unfortunately, it's I hate even mentioning it because it's such a black eye on humanity, I think. But a lot of Russian and German forces would strap suicide vests onto dogs and send them into opposing tanks to knock them off of their tracks. I mean, they would train dogs to just run straight towards a tank, and then they'd blow themselves up and disable a tank, which is a horrible thing to imagine.
But not surprising.
But not surprising. I mean, given the other atrocities that they committed. But it does speak volumes, though, to the versatility of dogs, and they've been used in so many different capacities, and still to this day, I mean, there's insulin resistance dogs and therapy dogs of every magnitude you can think of. I mean, there's so many different elements of our society that they've been plugged into that they've made life-changing differences in a very positive way. They're just man's best friend, I think.
Absolutely.
Is an understatement.
Absolutely. It would be really hard to go through this interview and not bring up buds.
Yeah.
and hopefully we'll have many more interviews, and you guys comment below if you want to see more Mike. But I want to know, I heard that there's this kid from Iowa, you read in a magazine about the Navy SEALs. And first of all, where were you swimming in Iowa? That's the first question.
Yeah, just in a swimming pool.
Okay.
Not in any big body of water. I mean, there's a few lakes and reservoirs and stuff. There's not a ton of water in Iowa, but I grew up competitively swimming. My dad wrestled in high school with Dan Gable, and Iowa's such a powerhouse wrestling state for decades. His knees and just entire lower body was pretty shot, and so he was doing a lot of swimming at the time while we were growing up as kind of a physical fitness rehab type of mechanism, and so we just all kind of gravitated towards that. And so because of my interest in the water and being competitive swimming all growing up, and being a part of competition sports swim clubs and things like that, I had kind of a natural inclination towards the SEAL teams because they're the premier maritime special operations unit. So, spending a lot of time in the swimming pool is obviously very different from combat diving and swimming and being in the ocean. My first time of actually being out in the ocean water was at Bud's. We had been to, Cocoa Beach, Florida or whatever, and I'd been, in ankle high water as a kid or whatever. But yeah, my first time actually being out in the ocean was at SEAL training, and very different experience.
Sure.
There's not a black line to guide off of. There's waves hitting you in the face. There's a swell and a current that's messing you up on the swims and whatever. And so, and I'd never really swam with fins either. So, for me, it was a hell of an adjustment to now swim in open ocean water with fins and having to guide, and it was a very different experience. It was humbling, frankly, because I was not very good at it. As good of a swimmer as I was not a very effective combat side stroke swimmer.
Was anybody?
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, some guys showed up. I think we had guys that were Olympic caliber swimmers. I was for sure not that. I mean, I was competitive, but not at that level. And so, those guys showed up, and it was a breeze for them. Some other guys, could barely swim, but I think it's almost one of those things where if you're in really good shape and you're competitive and you've got, strong genetics, you're almost better suited to not have all these bad habits of not using fins and be, you can. It's kind of like shooting. If teaching somebody who's never really shot, they don't have any bad habits as a kid that they picked up, so they're a little bit easier to teach that way. But yeah, back to your question, Iowa is not exactly a breeding ground for Navy SEALs. There's not many of us from there, but it kind of seemed like the natural fit for me. But.
So, two-part question: did you think you were ready for Buds, and then were you?
Sort of to both. You know? Yeah. I mean, I was confident. I'd started training for it when I was a sophomore. I originally started doing martial arts, and this was before MMA existed, and so it was kind of ahead of its time. It was a female instructor that was based off of Okinawan karate. Shout out to Pam Hammers, who was she was a stud. I mean, she put the fear of everything in me as a high school kid, and she was 5'3", 120-pound woman. But she ran this dojo that was underground, like it wasn't a commercial. It was out of her basement. And it was word of mouth, and she had to, accept you in, and it was pretty hardcore for its time. And we did, Filipino stick fighting and French foot fighting and wrestling and boxing and some jiu-jitsu. It was a form of that. I guess it was probably more like judo, but it was just a kind of a nice mix of a lot of different things, the way MMA is now. And this was before, any of that before the UFC even was in existence. But, so, having that as kind of the backdrop with which, between discipline and having a strong mental capacity and using a lot of kind of the traditional martial arts philosophies towards working out and training and taking things serious and being disciplined and things of that nature helped out a lot. She was really hardcore. The group was really hardcore. And so using that, and then still swimming a lot, and I started running a lot and really preparing. So I spent a good portion of my high school years training constantly to go there with that as my focus,
Sure.
So when I showed up, also not really knowing what to expect, I was 17. I turned right after I turned 18. I went to boot camp, and so I was, the youngest kid in the class, and it was kind of a deer in the headlights a little bit. But for me, showing up and then taking the test and seeing, out of quite a few kids that tried, and most of them didn't even pass the screening test, and I passed it what felt like relatively easily, was a pretty big confidence boost too. It's not a hard test, but I think doing it in succession and the mentality or the mental pressure of like, holy shit, I'm in the Navy and I'm trying out, to go to the SEAL training. And, it was a lot for young kids at that age. And so, most guys didn't make it. I passed it on the first time. And so then when I showed up, it was humbling. I mean, there's no such thing as showing up in good enough shape to make it. That's one of the things of SEAL training that, without question, I think is probably the most important thing for anybody that wants to go, is to realize the better shape you're in, the less mental pressure there's going to be, and the less you're going to have to rely on your mind to get you through a lot of training. But without a doubt.
So that's what I want to go deeper with. We're going to take a quick break, reset these cameras, and then I want to dig into that. Now, hang on. So physically, you think you're ready. Mentally, you think you're ready. You're swimming a lot. You're practicing martial arts, probably running. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're running a lot to get physically ready.
Yeah.
But the mental part, that's what gets everybody.
Yeah.
There's a lot of strong guys. There's a lot of good swimmers. There's a lot of guys that could run miles and miles and miles. But there's got to be, and this is why I love talking about this on this podcast with elite people like yourself, there's got to be a switch in your brain that goes when your body's at the limit. And there's all these little neurons firing off going, oh, nope. Now you're gonna break. You're gonna get sick. You're too cold. You can't. This muscle's gonna tear. You got pneumonia. Mm-hmm. There's all these little neurons firing, saying stop, stop, stop.
Yeah.
But you have a switch. Did you realize you had the switch then, or was it later in combat, or was it earlier as a kid? Or when did you figure out Mike has a switch that takes me to a new level past my physical capabilities?
For sure, it was well after. Unquestionably, I didn't join to not do that. I didn't join to quit. My dad and both my parents were never like overbearing in terms of their expectations, and I think that was in a healthy way. It's part of why I didn't want to let them down. It's just because they didn't put unrealistic expectations or super hard on me if I didn't make the grade with something or whatever. But to me, it's the realization that I've come to years later. And ironically enough, it's from working with so many dogs over the years at high levels, is that it's genetic. Because I was an instructor also my last 3.5 years in the Navy, and so being a SEAL instructor on the other side of that curtain is an interesting component to it, because we've all been through the training, and now when you're hanging out with the wizard behind the curtain and you see a lot of the things that you didn't realize took place. Are both fascinating, but they're also very insightful in terms of what you learn about yourself from having been through it. And you're like, Jesus Christ, we did that? Like even as an instructor, putting kids through Hell Week is exhausting, and you're only working an 8-hour shift, and these kids are doing it for 6 days straight. And so, but in terms of the genetic component, I truly believe that both in humans and in dogs, there's such a high number of parallels when it comes to performance and that 1%er type of mentality of having basically a complete disregard for your own life, is that is inherently not genetically normal for any living being, right? Is because our genetic code and makeup is such that self-preservation and the ability to perpetuate our gene pool is our primary focus, right? Survivability of a species is the number one thing that all species are designed to employ. And so just having that mentality is genetically not conducive to the survivability of a species. So to me, it makes sense that, when you're looking at human beings or dogs, is that disregard and saying, you know what, even though I know I'm heading into somewhere where, there's a high probability I'm going to lose my life, I'm going to fucking do it anyway. Is that isn't normal, and it can't be normal for human beings to survive and continue to exist. And so, as much as I'd love to say that I'm a tough guy, I'm not. I mean, to me, the guys and the dogs that make it through that training and have that disregard for their own safety is just a genetic mutation, frankly. And I do believe it's an abnormality or a mutation. In this case, in a good way. Sort of, in that if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to do that. And most people don't have that, which is why most people don't make it through training. With dogs, it's the same thing. Most dogs, when you get in their mind and I pick a fight with them and I make them understand that I'm here to snatch their soul, most of them say, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, and they pack sand and they quit. The ones that don't are incredibly rare, and even when you're breeding for that, I mean, the luxuries I've had as a dog trainer and breeder and fancier of different working breeds is being able to selectively breed, unlike human beings. And so even when you take a male and a female that have that trait at a very high level, their offspring, most of them don't have it. Even when you're doing it generation after generation and you're playing God and being able to pick the genetic combinations properly, it's still a very elusive trait and something that's really hard to replicate.
Not the answer I was expecting. Very convincing, and I'm pretty sure I believe you because you're very convincing. But to be a 1%er on this earth, you got to be born with it.
I think
so. That's your argument. What if there's someone out there that goes, how do I mentally train myself to become a 1%er? And is your answer, you can't? You just got to be born with it?
Yeah, I mean, to me...
You're not a very good motivational speaker to a big crowd.
Well, yeah, I mean, tough shit, right?
But that's not what you're known for anyway.
No, I mean,
you're not known for sugarcoating.
Well, I mean, to me, if motivational speakers worked, there wouldn't be 5,000 of them.
That's so true. And 1 million books.
Yeah, I mean, like if Tony Robbins, if one of his seminars worked, those people wouldn't ever need to come back, and they would be able to go teach it to everybody else.
That is so true.
Yeah, I mean, I truly think is that, like with dogs, there's so many parallels between humans and dogs, is that most people with dog training is that it takes that same kind of level of dedication to truly have a trained dog. I mean, yes, some people get lucky with that unicorn that doesn't really need to be trained and just picks things up and is a dream dog and whatever, but those are outliers. Most people, just like with working out or getting a black belt in jiu-jitsu or being a great chef, is that there are elements to that just require a lot of repetition and dedication. And unfortunately, human beings aren't typically that dedicated. If you look at the mass population, there's more lazy people than there are not.
Yeah.
And I would pose kind of the same question to you, being in the entertainment industry. There are people. American Idol, I think, teaches us a good lesson in humility that way, and that there's some people that work their entire childhood and their parents get them the lessons and that that's what they want to do, and they work their ass off and they get the training and whatever, and they still just absolutely suck.
Yeah.
You're
right.
So
you're right.
To me it's the same. Is that because to me, people talk about motivation and motivation peters out in everybody, and that's where discipline comes in, right? And so where discipline comes in is that's you making the concerted, conscious decision to say, you know what, this sucks, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. To me, while on the surface that may seem like a choice, I truly believe that you and having the ability to make yourself do things that suck is genetic, because most people can't do it. And again, the motivational speaker thing, if you could motivate and convince somebody to put themselves through that, there'd be way more SEALs, entertainers, black belts in jiu-jitsu, successful entrepreneurs, everything. Is that that small fraction of the percentage of the population that truly says there is no plan B, there's no safety net, I'm going to do what I set out to do come hell or high water, you're going to have to kill me to stop me. Is that there's just not many people that truly have that when it starts to suck.
I can't argue, man. You're right, and it's in the music business as well. You know, a lot of people will ask, what does it take, and do they have what it takes? And the true answer is, I usually know right off the bat, you don't.
Yeah.
And sometimes they do.
Yeah.
But are you willing to do what no one else is?
Yeah.
And that's not a matter of work ethic, really. It's not a matter of, well, I'll just stay up all night and work. That doesn't equate to doing what no one else will ever do consistently.
Yeah.
And maybe you're just born with it. I cannot argue with that.
Yeah, I mean, again, having seen so many people, give you the lip service of no, and again, as an instructor, I saw it time and time again, with an 85% attrition rate, you see these kids who for years have been training for something, finally are given the shot, they come and in the first few days ring the bell and quit. And the first thing that they say 5 minutes after they quit, well, I'm coming back. Motherfucker, you could still be here.
How does that happen? I always wonder that. How do you do that?
Yeah,
it happens every class.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just...
Why do you do that?
Again, I think it's, it's a mental lack of capacity.
But why do they even go through that? How have they not learned that they're not capable of that before they start?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I can't answer. I don't understand it. I've never understood it. I've tried. And, I've talked to, a number of kids who, and that's not a decision that it's like deciding to not play baseball this year. I mean, that's a life-altering decision that you are going to regret for the rest of your life, rest assured.
Yeah, you're going to remember that bell for the rest of your life.
Well, and above and beyond that is that, when you go from there, like, it's not, well, let's kick you back in training and give you another shot. Like, you're going to go to the fleet and chip paint for 4 years. And live on a prison ship, basically, being the lowest of the low. You're an undesignated seaman, which, how many jokes can you throw?
Multiple meanings behind that. Yeah.
But, so you go to the fleet and you're basically a worker bee, for several years, most of the guys, and so, that's a pretty miserable existence. And they know that going in. I mean, I think the SEAL teams are a unique bunch in that, unlike the Army or the Marines or Air Force or whatever, is that if you don't make it in their special operations courses, you generally go do things that are somewhat similar. Maybe you're in infantry. If you didn't make it through Rangers or Green Beret Q course or whatever, well, then you're in an infantry unit or an armored division unit or something like that, and you're still going into combat and doing a lot of the same things, maybe just not at the higher level. Marines, same thing. Like, you're going to be in infantry if you don't make it. In the Navy, like, your life is going to be vastly different. You're going to be wearing, haze gray dungarees and you're out, swabbing decks and cleaning dishes and floating around, the world miserable for several years. And so
you're so right.
To know that, and it's not like that's a secret. I mean, they know that is their fate if they quit. And I think what it always boils down to is mental pressure. Whether that's manifested through environmental conditions like cold water or stress and mental pressure from the staff, or the anticipation of what's next, or watching the sun go down in Hell Week and knowing it's about to get real miserable cold and you're going to be laying in the water, and there's a million mind games that the staff plays, with the students to test them over and over and over, and it's not uncommon to see, one of the cadre, whoever's leading an exercise or an evolution, say, okay, pick your boats back up. We're going to run down to somewhere that's 6 miles away. And they start running and guys quit. And then they put the boats down and turn around and come back. They weren't even going to go down there. They just made it seem like they were going to do that. And that happens all the time, whether it's, doing a big loop on a run where you pass where you were supposed to turn in and stop. And, yep, all right, we're going to do it again. And you're like, Jesus, that was 4 miles. We got to do that again. And they only go for 200 or 300 yards, and they see guys quit in that little amount of time of knowing, Christ, we got to go do that same 4 mile run again. But then they don't even do it. Or, having guys march out into the water and then lay down in it, and do surf torture and do that. They go out into the water, they come back, they go out, they come back, and you'll get guys quitting on the way back out there all the time. And then that ends up the group didn't even go back out there. They just pretended to send them back out there. So, and I mean, to me, it's just, it ultimately always boils down to mental toughness. And again, I think, where discipline and mental toughness kind of crisscross is in that genetic arena of, it's either there or it isn't.
So which one can you cultivate, mental toughness or discipline?
I think you can teach people to be disciplined to a certain point, but what I've learned again in dogs is that genetics are the thermometer, if you will. It is the bar at which you are always going to be limited by, right? So take Muhammad Ali. Why do we know his name? It's not because he had a great coach and worked hard and, started early. It's because he had the genetics to, when he applied those things, allowed him to get to a level that is world class.
Yep.
And so I think that, again, in dogs and with people, it's the exact same thing, is that you could use entertainment or sports in any sport as another, kind of gateway to that, is that if you have the genetics and you put the time in and have great coaches and start early and do all of the things that are required to get to that world-class level, you'll get there. If you don't have the genetics, all of that and every, sports camp, summer camp and, 3-week spring break training seminar with Peyton Manning, it's not going to turn you into that if the genetics just aren't there to support it. So
you're saying David Goggins, who I don't know, maybe you know David.
I actually don't, and I've never met. I don't think I've ever even met him.
You're saying all the squawking he does on social media about people need to get hard and toughen up, he's just speaking to nobody, because unless you're born with it, you're not going to be reformed by somebody like that.
I would say largely yes. Are there some people that, without a doubt, guys like Jocko or David Goggins or Tony Robbins or any of the people that, use a lot of that, mentality and kind of, almost soapbox preach to people that way, are they positively impacting people's lives? Yeah, I think they are.
Sure.
And I think that there's some people that they actually probably make a significant difference in. Are they turning zeros into heroes? No. Again, if they were, there'd be a fuck ton more heroes out there. But to me, it's kind of ignorance is bliss in a way, in that I see it in dog training a lot. A lot of people will sign up for my online dog training. Not a lot of people, but a number of them will sign up for it and not really use it. They'll sign on a couple times, watch a few videos, they do a session here or there. It makes them feel better about being a dog owner.
Feels good. Feels good to hear Jocko tell you to get tough.
It makes you feel good
get
to take a
early.
Picture of your watch and post it, with your 9 followers and it makes you feel like you're part of something, and it gives you purpose. And I'm not knocking that. To me, it's just if you're trying to get to a level of world class, whether it's special operations or super high level dog training or touring, where you're selling out 30,000 audience venues, and at that level, or you own an 8 or 9 figure business as an entrepreneur, and you've built several of them, with a lot of these like entrepreneur clinics and stuff, is that if it was a matter of just listening to this guy and trying to apply that, then there'd be way more of them in every industry, in every walk of life.
So you're not trying to come out with a self-growth book anytime?
Well, I think if I do this episode, for sure, just canceled all the orders.
Well, it also, and I hate to call anybody out here, but it also just highlights the fact that if you're writing a personal growth book, you're trying to make some money.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You're trying to get some clicks, make some money, but those guys probably know. Tony Robbins goes to bed every night and knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's saying all the right things.
Sure.
Are people digesting it? Probably not. Sometimes, but probably not.
Yeah, I think, again, most people are probably somewhere in the middle where, maybe they pick up a couple of things that for sure improves their life in certain ways. It's not me knocking some guys. I mean, to me, guys like Tony Robbins, they probably positively impacts fewer people than Jocko, Dave Goggins, things like that. And I'm not just saying that because they're, brethren of mine. I think they've walked it, to my knowledge. Tony Robbins' business is built off of his ability to tell you that he can teach you how to run a business.
Right.
Whereas, these other guys have proven over and over and over, of walking what they walk. But I still think, that only goes as far as what the person's genetic capabilities are willing to allow them to go.
So true, man. It's so true. So, me and you, similar age. I think you said high school 96.
Yeah. Yep.
So I was 98, and our generation which is, parents, the Vietnam era, grandparents, World War II. I always think that our generation has seen the biggest demasculation
For sure.
in our culture.
Yeah.
And how do you see that playing out? Is there going to be a wave of masculinity that rises again, or does this keep going till everyone is neutral?
Yeah. So to me, back to, I think Mother Nature trumps everything. Is that, that adage, and I'll probably mess it up, but it's hard times create strong men create, good times create weak men, weak men create hard times, and it's just this cycle that keeps going through is that if you look at human history, at least as well as we know it, how it's been recorded, which, who can debate it? That's just what it says. It doesn't mean that's exactly how it happened. But, I think we all live in an information age that's digested enough to understand that that's a pretty true representation of mankind. And so to me, there is a point in every society and every empire and every, cultural section of the world that kind of goes through that cycle in some way. And so to me, the demasculation that we've experienced over the last few decades has a shelf life, because America as a country, you don't have to look very far, even now, within the last few weeks, that things can get pretty gnarly pretty quick. And there's a lot of other places on the planet that, that have truly brutal dictatorships that, I've gone and fought against. And seeing when it's true evil that's in power and they decide, we're going to stay in power and we're going to keep things the way they are, that there's an element of your society that has to rise to a certain occasion. And we can only soften ourselves so much for so long before somebody is going to say, now we're going to own them, and they will. Whether it's China, Russia, a combination of several other countries, who knows? It could be a complete self-destruction within our own way of life, looking at the way things have been going. But again, the rest of the world and human beings are opportunistic in nature. A lot of other nations are very vulture-like in the way that they view things.
Sure.
And are just waiting for the right opportunity to say, we're going to take everything that we want from there. And people that are so naive and head in the sand to think that can't happen, like it's happening all over the world. It always has and it always will. Violence and physical altercation is truly the gold standard at some point. It will come to that. It's coming to that. You see it in Seattle as an example. This Chaz and now Chop and whatever, is that the fact that we have a society where the police is saying, we're just not going to do anything about that. That's kind of the start of the dominoes falling, in my opinion, in that if a society is willing to just let people take the country over that way, like look what's happened there. That's a microcosm of what the entire country will be if it continues to go down the road that it's been going down, is that a group of people is going to realize we can do whatever we want, and then they're going to go do whatever they want. And now you're, all of your rights and don't say this word and stop bullying, all that shit is going to go right out the window. And you're going to have groups of people doing exactly what they're doing in CHOP, which is killing each other and running a brutal dictatorship and having, guns and walls and, their own secret, police or enforcers that are running around, doing what they want. It'll turn into, a brutal regime type of environment if nobody decides, we can't let this go on any longer. That's unfortunately the path we're going down.
So good, man. So good. And you have probably had the gift. You don't look at it as a gift. You didn't then, but I'm assuming you have looked in the eyes of someone that told you through the eyes, I want to own you.
Without a doubt.
I want to own you.
Without a doubt.
And not, most people haven't. Yeah. Most people haven't seen that staring them back in the face.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if that would change people's opinions.
Yeah,
if they had that gift that you've had.
I think that by itself, without the context of the greater gravity or heaviness of what's going on around you, I don't think would. But for sure, it would help. It would prove beneficial. But I think, until you've seen, I think the the real brutal violence and anger that exists in some people toward you, irrespective of what you try to convince them otherwise, or if you're willing to negotiate or give ground, compromise, whatever, is that there are certain people that there is nothing you can do or say that's going to change their mind. That they want to, remove your life and existence from the planet, whether it's you as an individual, you as a society, as a nation, as a state, whatever. And until you've seen that, it's impossible to realize it, and it's also unfair and unrealistic for those that have experienced that to expect people to understand what that's like, because they're just not going to. No different than a child that's never been out of Iowa, that spent his entire life in a small podunk town in Iowa, and it's like trying to expect him to understand what being street smart in Harlem is like. Like, he's just not going to know. Mm-hmm. And if he goes there, he's going to get owned, because he just doesn't know any better. And unfortunately, we've been riding off of the coattails of the greatest generation in World War II, and they did, springboarding off of the Great Depression, surviving that, overcoming World War II, and then that shelf life of success is starting to expire from what I see, and you can only ride the wave of a generation who's willing to walk the walk for so long before you've got to answer that call too, and there still are people that do it, but there's not enough. There's too many people that are willing to just lay it down.
I want to preface, I don't even want to come close to matching anything you've ever done, but the tiny minuscule story I could tell you is that one of our entertainment tours in Iraq, we were playing a concert, and suddenly in the middle of the concert there was incoming, because as we heard the music cued some bad guys. Mm-hmm. And as we got into the bunker, I thought, for the first time ever, somebody's trying to kill me because they hate me.
Yeah.
Because of who I am, because of my culture.
Yeah.
And that, I dwelled on that thought. That was the weirdest feeling, to know that someone hates you and they've never even met you.
Yeah. Well, and to me, that kind of, I think, exemplifies, that context that I was talking about, is that it's one thing for somebody to look at you and you can tell, especially if, all of the other information surrounding supports the fact that they're actively trying to take your life. But that changes everybody. For sure, I was very different from the first time I went overseas and faced, other human beings that, and being in an area where, the majority of the population is actively trying to take your life. When you're in that environment and, bullets are flying by your head, and you're in a helicopter that almost gets shot down, and, mm-hmm. You're going through areas that you get ambushed and somehow make it out alive, it 100% changes you the same way it did you. And to me, you don't have to be a professional soldier or a combat veteran to experience that. I mean, people experience it on the street. Obviously, it's different circumstances, but that principle is the exact same. Once you've seen that, it changes people for sure.
We've talked another 30 minutes. Can take a quick break. Yep. Be right back. Our granddads were both cooks in the Navy in World War II.
No doubt.
And and I heard you say that, and then you also said the same thing I thought, that a cook is not what you think it was when you're on a ship in World War II, because my granddad told me stories of, he was in the Pacific. I believe your granddad was on the other side, and in the Mediterranean. And my granddad told me stories of kamikazes coming in and taking out the gunner. So he's sitting in the turret,
Yeah.
And it's a you're right when you said it's the greatest generation, and they did what they did because they had no other choice.
Yeah. To me, it's interesting. I was listening to your last guest, you guys talking about not having a plan B. That's where we were as an entire society. At that point, is there wasn't if we don't do this, it's no. We have to go do this, or the world will cease to exist as we know it.
Yep.
It literally, you hear existential threat gets thrown around, constantly nowadays and overused, but it truly was that back then. And to me, what's interesting is the entire nation banded together, and everybody, had that collective mentality of, we're all going to do what we can to the best of our ability to support, the mission. And the mission was to go defeat Japan and Germany, or the Axis powers at least. And, for them to be able to accomplish that and go over there, even though, combat deployments they're tough, they're stressful in their own right. It's a little bit of apples to oranges to compare, wars in Afghanistan and Iraq compared to World War II. However, we at least get a rotational break.
Right.
Now,
right.
Granted, some guys are going for 13, 15 months at a stretch, but they still get to come home. I mean, some of those guys went over there for 4 years straight.
Right.
And there wasn't satellite phones, there wasn't internet that, they got a handwritten letter out, once in a great while, or got something when they could or whatever. But, they basically went over there saying, we'll come home when the job is done.
Yeah.
And that's hard to even wrap your mind around. But I think very similar to the mentality that you guys are talking about, without that mentality, you're not going to be successful. If you go over there and you can retreat, I mean, it's the Viking adage of burn your boats, right?
Yeah.
Is that, when you get over there, us sailing back home isn't an option, so we're going to take over your entire country is kind of how you have to look at it that way. And there was, I think, a certain innocence and naivete that existed between, and some could argue that whether or not it's good or bad, but of kind of state-run media doing maybe a little better job of protecting the country from some of the the realistic truths of combat, and crossing over into Vietnam, where I think America really kind of lost its innocence as it relates to its understanding of what war is really like. Again, you could argue whether it's good and bad. I think there's pros and cons to both. But back then, when there was still kind of that, hey, this is what we have to do, and everybody was behind it, and it seemed like, again, neither of us were around then, but it seemed like much simpler times back then, where it was a lot easier to just unite everybody. And
you're so right.
There was a common enemy, and there wasn't all this division and infighting. And now I feel like, we're getting ready to repeat the Civil War almost, and that there's a lot of debate. And one of the questions you hear, in reference to World War II is, in terms of Nazism, is how did that happen? Most people are like, how could a country have ever, gotten to a point where they're willing to do that to another group of people? And I see a lot of scary and stark parallels to what happened back then versus what happens now, and that you've got a significant portion of our population that is okay, with the opposing side being brutalized and even celebrating it, because they disagree with them politically. And to me, that's poisonous. It's dangerous. Yeah. And you get to the point where you lack empathy for people that oppose you politically, to the point where you're okay with their rights being taken away, with them being, attacked on the street because they, are wearing shirts or hats of whatever their political party is. And to me, like, that's a slippery slope if I've ever seen one, and that's not too many steps further, and now you've got internment camps and concentration camps and things like that. I worry that we've kind of numbed ourselves to a side of empathy that human beings should have more than they do nowadays. It's
a valid worry. My other granddad was in Europe. He was flying a B-24 out of Italy, and so I read his flight diary. I've read every mission many times, and unfortunately, after he died, was the first time I really dove into that. I never talked about it when he was around. But those missions, he was so scared. If he's going into the oil fields in Ploesi or hitting Munich, and he had fighters and it was terrible. But as scared as he was to go back up again on another mission, there wasn't maybe I'm going to call in sick today. There wasn't another option. Yeah. And sometimes he just did it because he had to. That was all he could do for him and his guys. And the other thing was, every once in a while he would say something like, "Missed the target really bad today. I feel terrible. We missed the target really bad." And I thought to myself, in those little words, what he means is, probably got a lot of innocent people today. Yeah. And that's just the way it is in war.
Yeah.
And today, that wouldn't fly.
For sure.
You couldn't say that. You couldn't do that. There would be an investigation.
Yeah.
And that was just the way that it was back then, because that's all there was. It was black and white.
For sure. To me, where I worry, I guess, about, the transgressions that have taken place, or the regression, rather, that we've delved into as a society as it relates to combat is trying to regulate certain things. And I've talked at length, a number of times about, kind of my view on foreign policy is really not too dissimilar than that of a street fight. Is that, let's say you're walking by an establishment and there's a brawl going on, and you decide to walk in. You going in there is going to cause problems. You not going in there is going to cause problems. There's nothing that you can do or not do that isn't going to piss somebody off and help somebody else out. But the problem is that, no different than if I, get attacked on the street or somebody, tries to break into my house, is that, that isn't the time for me trying to be a gentleman about it.
Yeah.
And I look back at, as a Civil War lesson learned, Tecumseh Sherman, of the mentality of, and, he went to Atlanta and basically burned the entire city down, is that, at that time, war is horrible, and when you tit for tat and cat and mouse the way that we've done in Iraq and Afghanistan, you get a lot more of your own side killed. You get a lot more of the other side killed, frankly, than what you should or need to. And it really needs to boil down to is that, you use diplomacy and negotiations and compromise until, all of those options are exhausted. And once it gets to that point where war is the only option left, and you have to employ, your armed forces to go fight another country's armed forces, at that point, you take the gloves off and you do absolutely whatever you have to end it as fast as possible. There is no good way to fight a war other than to make it as brutal and as fast and just done as quick as possible. That's the only thing that's going to minimize damage as best you can. Like it's going to suck. People are going to lose their life, and there's going to be some innocent people lost. But when you look at Afghanistan, and you've got going on 20 years of sustained combat there, and countless lives on both sides, and trillions of dollars, and you look at what really has been gained, and it's hard to have a very positive answer with that, is that you've got to just decide, I'm not going to go to war unless it's absolutely necessary. If it is necessary, we're going to go over there and we're going to absolutely fucking destroy you guys, and that's it. And as soon as it's done, we're going to leave, and then if you mess with us again, we're coming back over and do the same thing. Sherman
was considered a hero after what he did.
Yeah,
how long do you think Sherman would have lasted on Twitter these days?
Yeah, he'd be in Leavenworth making big rocks into little rocks.
Man, what Tecumseh Sherman did was so far off the grid from what anyone could possibly understand in warfare today. And like you said, though, he did what he had to do.
Yeah, because it was stalling at that point, and the Civil War lasted 5 years as it is. Hundreds of thousands of countrymen were lost on both sides. And you get to a point where it's like, ripping the Band-Aid off almost. It's just, shit or get off the pot. Like at some point you've got to just decide, we're here to accomplish a mission. We're going to do whatever it takes to do that. And one of our biggest problems as a country is utilizing politicians and people that have no experience and frankly no business directing or dictating rules of engagement or how to conduct yourself as a professional warfighter to people who are professional warfighters. And that's one of our biggest hamstrings and detriments to our armed forces, is outsourcing that tactical control and looking to dad for a can I do this type of mentality that ultimately just ends up causing way more harm than good, because those guys have no business directing troops. They don't know what it's like to be there, and frankly they don't really even understand the implications foreign policy wise. To me, it's no different than calling a plumber, and when he gets over here, I don't know shit about plumbing, but I'm going to tell him, hey, be careful with that pipe, and I'd really rather you not use that wrench. Yeah. Like, you hired him to do a job, let him do his job. That's what the military is. Our job is to go overseas and break shit. And so don't send us over there until you need us to do that. But when you need us to do that, send us over there and let us do it. And if it just stays that simple, I think far less problems would be had. I truly believe that some of life's most complex problems actually have the simplest solutions to them, and that being a classic example of it.
We want people to go get the termites out of our house, but not tear up any of the drywall.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million analogies you could use in all other walks of life that you don't do it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not going to argue with a brain surgeon on how he's going to take a tumor out of my head.
Yep.
And I don't care if he's a nice guy. I mean, while we're on the topic of, hating politicians because they don't like, the way that they conduct themselves or what they say, like, I don't give a shit. If he does a good job and he does what needs to be done, I like him. If I need a full knee replacement and the doctor's a prick, I'm not going to switch doctors because I want to like the guy. I don't care if he's good at what he does. But, unfortunately, we have a problem with being able to separate those things at a high level nowadays. But
what does the American flag mean to you? It's not a trick question.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's opportunity is the first thing that comes to mind. Really, is that it's a combination of freedom and opportunity. Freedom is dicey, though, in that when I look at our country and I think, what does a truly free society look like? 2020 United States of America isn't what I think of. There's a lot of things that you're not allowed to do, unfortunately, that it frankly breaks my heart that, myself and a lot of, countrymen of mine have given a fair bit for. But I still think it's the best and freest country on the planet, and I'm very proud to be an American. I'm proud to have fought for it. But it does worry me how much of our freedoms and liberties have gone to shit, especially here recently with Corona and race protests and riots and things of that nature. But
so why is that flag starting to represent racism?
Well, to me, it doesn't represent it to me.
Yeah, absolutely. But why is that getting that perception?
So I think, just give you, we'll go back, almost do a little history lesson here, I guess. Is that I
would
think,
love that. Love history.
I think the 1990s, and bear with me, it's kind of a long tail on the kite, if you will, but the 90s, I think, when political correctness started to creep into our society, and as it relates to children, is that, like with most things, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, is that, abusive parents and things of that nature, the desire on a society and a government to try to mitigate those types of things turned into an overcorrection of now micromanaging parents and school administrations, teachers, etc. All of the unit, the family and community unit that has the ability to impact and raise children the way that they need to be raised, i.e. productively and be an asset, not a liability, was severely diminished. Again, the intentions were good, I think, but when you overcorrect to a point where now the opposite intended consequence is taking place, that's when there's a problem. Is there wasn't a happy medium approach, and so now you can't spank your kids, you can't say this to them, you can't ground them, you can't take anything away from them. That they can sue you for taking the cell phone that you pay for away from them. It's gotten so ridiculous is that now you have generations, and people always ask, what's it going to be like when these entitled generation whatevers grow up? Well, now you're looking at it is that you've got a society where somebody's bullying me, let me whine about it to somebody and they'll make it stop. Somebody picked on me for this, let me tell on them. Somebody stole this from me, let me just go report them. Is that we've micromanaged and helicoptered 2 generations of children to a point at which now they are just born and bred and conditioned into a victim mentality, right? Is that I can't solve any problem on my own, right? Is that I'm going to get in trouble if I punch the bully in the face. I'm going to get in trouble if I solve my own problems. I need to go to my mom or my teacher or whatever. And so to me, 20 years later, is that now you've got adults who are entitled, who every time that there's a problem is that instead of trying to work it out, is that they throw a fucking temper tantrum like you're seeing right now. Is that they just go demand that, well, I want this and I need that and you need to take this down and that offends me, and all of this other stuff because they've been taught that for the last 20 years. And so, now we've created this environment where that thrives. And so to me, it's not that now all of a sudden racism exists. I mean, if you look at the historical context of our country, I mean, as of 1965, at least on a large scale platform where it was accepted, it stopped.
Right.
There were pockets here and there that have slowly dwindled over time. And yes, there's pockets that still exist, but guess what? There are pockets of that exist in every society. I can tell you as somebody who's been to other places, and not even just saying against me, I mean, seeing the way certain groups are treated in other countries, and these are their own citizens, makes any of the worst travesty you've ever seen in this country look like a fucking picnic. It happens, and we still have the freest, most democratically balanced, middle-of-the-road society out there, but it's unfortunately...
In the entire world.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's not getting better, it's getting worse because of this entitled generation that is now, the participation trophy crew that thinks that they ought to get paid just for showing up, and it's going to come to bite us in the ass for sure. Again, it has a shelf life, and there will come a time much sooner than later that the country, Mother Nature, the planet, whatever, is going to self-correct in some way, shape, or form, and it's going to get back out of balance.
I'm afraid you're right, and it's maybe that's the wrong choice of words. I'm happy that I believe that you're right. It's going to get worse before it gets better, I believe, and it's going to hurt to rip that Band-Aid off. But I do think that genetics and Mother Nature will correct itself, like you said. And Mike, you're active on social media. You have a really good podcast called The Mic Drop, and I've listened to a bunch of those episodes, and what you're kind of known for is you speak the truth through common sense, the way that you see it, and you're not filtered by trying to win people over or win an election of some kind or make a whole bunch of money. By the way, I hope you do. Make a whole bunch of money. But you're not filtered by any kind of other reason besides just seeing things through common sense. And it's so many times I just wish people could put all their other motives aside and just see the basics. Let's just look at things the most basic way. And I'm just so grateful, man, that you are a voice out there for people to listen to.
Well, I appreciate that very much. My intent with starting it was, essentially that was that, I'd been on a number of other podcasts where it was, hey, we don't want to talk about this, or hey, my sponsor, wants us to stay away from that, or whatever, and it's just like, for me, like I don't take the approach of the Howard Stern shock jock where it's what can I say that's really going to piss as many people off as possible, or how can I get a rise out of this group, or what can I say to get everybody to click on this and watch this. Like nothing could be further from my intent as it relates to that. It's just, while I don't go out of my way to piss anybody off, I'm not concerned if I do, and so
well said.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty liberating that way. Well said. And again, like I'm not going to just run my mouth if I don't have anything to back it up. Like I'm not just going to say, oh well, throw something wild out there and not have at least I've spent some time thinking about it, or I've talked to X, Y, and Z. I've had some remarkable people on the show over the last couple of years, and I'm actually working on a book. It'll be a musings of mic drop type of politics book, where it's kind of taking a little bit from all the different people that I've interviewed and the subject matters of expertise that they play a role in, and kind of combining it all into a lot of what we're talking about here today, and just kind of laying it all out there of how this country has kind of turned into what it has, and what what we need to identify to ultimately fix it, hopefully. But
And you don't come across as an idealist, which at the same time becomes dangerous on either side.
Yeah.
Being an idealist meaning, I believe this, no matter what, no one will ever change my mind. That's just how I was raised, and that's how I believe. You're more of a, this is the way I see it, and this is what I've learned in my life,
yeah.
and this is how firmly I believe this because of essentially street smarts. And it's really helpful. I also want to say for the listeners here, what would you tell them is the first place to go if they want to find out more about you? Like, what's the direction to go to?
Sure. So if you just go to MikeRitland.com, that's kind of the hub that has everything else. The shirt that I'm wearing, teamdog.pet.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's my online training that is primarily what I'm focused on now from a dog standpoint, other than the other projects that I've been doing. So teamdog.pet, MikeRitland.com, Tricos.com. On social media, it's just at @mritland on Instagram, Tricos or Team Dog. Google searching either one of those. Last but certainly not least, I had the distinct honor and privilege of being a part of founding the Warrior Dog Foundation back in 2010, where we've at this point taken in almost 200 dogs in the last 10 years and these are all dogs, mind you, that are ones that they're kind of the Hannibal Lecters of the dog
Sure.
world. They're ones that were going to be euthanized if we didn't take them. So they're a handful. Most of the dogs that I've been bit by, outside of the equipment and unexpectedly from my standpoint, are most of those dogs. But it's something we're very proud and passionate about. And so warriordogfoundation.org is where you can check that out and hopefully help support the cause. Because like I said, we are kind of the last ditch effort for all of the dogs that all have been put to sleep if we hadn't taken them. And we take them from police departments, military units, federal law enforcement, customs, border patrol, you name it. So, a lot of dogs have come through, and we've been able to rehome some of them, reunite some of them with their handlers, or at a minimum at least give them, kind of the out to pasture, type of environment, and let them just be a dog and live out their life the way they need to. But.
Well, brother, thank you for your mission. I'm a dog lover myself, so thank you for that. Thank you for your service to this country. Thank you for your brutal honesty that we all need to hear. And thank you for driving 3 hours up here, man. I appreciate it. And I hope that you guys comment below if you want to see more Mike. And I hope that we get to do this many, many more times over the years.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to see you start a podcast. It's awesome.
Heck yeah, brother. Appreciate you.
All right.
See you guys.
Thank you.